Um, Hi, everyone. This is the Wildfire Cluster of ESIP. My name is Tim Bailey, and uh, Dave Jones and Douglas Rao are the cluster coordinators, or is it cluster leads?
Yeah,
Um,
co-chairs, that works.
yeah. So first of all, could people sign in the attendance and check-in page, first of all? The arc of this meeting is a quick introduction. Then Karen Tabor from is going to present on some issues about access and I interpret it as human-centered design issues with uh, tools in a crowded space. And then I'm going to present a little on how data systems are intersecting with kind of operational fire capacity. And then the majority of the cluster meeting is going to be oriented towards a Miro project where we are going to basically map out the arc of what the cluster can be and what we want it to be. And and then finally we'll come back and have a session recap. So the Miro, people are welcome to take a look at the Miro board now and start thinking about things. I will do an introduction in a little while, like after I do my presentation. Um, but this is basically a space that we will actually have access to this Miro board for a while to plan cluster activities. So if we find it useful, we can continue to elaborate in this space, you know, for evidently at least a few months. And so our first speaker is Karen Tabors from she's currently working at USAID and NASA on the uh, a famine, but she's actually presenting on work that she did at University of Maryland on and the name of the talk is Digital Access in a Crowded Tool Space. I identified this paper as being very prescient for some of the issues that I was seeing in the wildfire resilience space. And people feel free to use chat to message in questions in the near term, and then we'll have a much more open discussion later in the session. And so with that, Karen, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. And is that all good? You can see that?
Looks good.
Yeah. Oops. Skip ahead. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I know it's kind of a strange topic to present because I'm presenting on my PhD thesis work that was kind of came out of all of my experiences and knowledge and my scientific research over 20 years working in international conservation. And I was working on fire management and deforestation, like forest management issues. Just recently, well, last 3 years, I've moved into government. So now I'm, as Tim said, I'm working at NASA and USAID on the Famine Early Warning System Network. But today, this talk is really all about the PhD work I did and the insights that I had learned over my 20-year career in international conservation. I know also a lot of you are US based, but I think there's still a lot of overlaps that I've seen because I also was a wildfire PI for a time, and I got to collaborate with lot of people, a lot of researchers within the US-based researchers. So, so I hope that, some of this is interesting and topical and really kind of starts a good discussion. So after working 20 years, like I said, I was working on I developed a fire alert system, and it was using, firms data, like the VEERS and MODIS data, and disseminating that to protected area managers, people working on forest management, trying to prevent fires, fire spreading, try to detect illegal activities in the forest from illegal clearing. And it was all about how do you get this satellite information into the hands of that person on the ground in a very remote area who can actually use that information to make a decision that actually prevents deforestation or further deforestation and fires. So, after working in the space for a long time and working all over the world with predatory managers, doing capacity building workshops about using satellite data and these, alert-based systems for tools, I just felt like it's just there's this. It's the challenge was linking the information to action. We had the information, we had it, it was timely enough, we have it, but how do you actually connect that? And often they are receiving the information, but they can't do anything with it. So my PhD research was that piece, like how do we actually connect that? So some of the questions I was asking was, well, when I started in this space, it was maybe a handful, like 4 systems that were in use as the early 2000s. And all of a sudden, there was just this, with cloud computing, cheaper computing and faster processing and web-based systems, there was really just an explosion of tools as you've all kind of experienced it. And there wasn't really good documentation on what systems are out there, who's using them, and for what applications. And I wanted to know, like, there's a ton out there, but what's preventing people from actually using them? And then also specifically talk about some opportunities and challenges for implementation. And in this part was really about addressing issues of risks of technology, of surveillance technologies. In the space I was working in, these tools they were used in some cases against marginalized communities to enforce policies on communities. So while a lot of times it's like, oh, this is a great tool, and there's a lot of positivity around optimism of how this is going to be applied and it's going to make things better, there were a lot of negative consequences in some cases. And how do we navigate that? How do we take advantage of technology while addressing the potential risks in advance? So again, my first question, I started looking at this as like, especially in the environmental field, in the last 10 years, there's just so much hope and promise. And we're seeing this now with AI too, like this technology is going to save the world. This is great. This is all our solution. Everything's going to be fixed because we have this technology boom. And so all of the problems that we have are going to be solved. Lots of money going into systems, tools, new technologies, innovation, everything was innovative. Lots of money flowing into new innovative tools. So that kind of caused, there's like a lot of tools, a lot of data platforms that now exist. And often the challenge to many users was, well, which one should I use for my application? I know in conservation, it was, especially with forest monitoring, you have these rapid alerts for forest disturbances, and they were just pixel-based flagging this, there was a disturbance, and people were using that, saying, okay, well, that area, that pixel is like 900 meters, therefore we had 900 meters of deforestation, and adding that up and calling it all deforestation. And there was a lot of confusion on how you can best utilize certain tools. And one of my first papers was specifically that, like looking at the differences, the right tool for the right application, what you can actually get when you're getting data within an hour. It's not going to be quantitative, and it's not going to be the highest quality, but it's something that you need in a certain time frame. So my first paper was kind of, how do we discern the use of different tools? And then, as I mentioned, we're in this era of data abundance and accessibility, and it's great. There's so much data, and so much data is being created every day. We have almost like 1,000 Earth observation satellites in orbit, yet 5 countries own pretty much all of those. And especially in the last 5, 6 years, maybe more, the commercial satellites, like the constant launching of commercial satellites. So there's so much more, so many more satellites in space collecting information about Earth, but we still have like 1/3 of Earth's population that don't have reliable internet access. So as part of my research, as I mentioned, I want to know who's using the systems and for what applications, what's out there, and why are they using it, and because it just wasn't well documented. So I did a qualitative analysis. I was doing using survey data, doing interviews with users and developers of particularly fire and forest monitoring systems. So in this case, I was trying to focus on the near term, rapid alerting systems, and getting feedback on what are people using out there. And this word cloud kind of shows who is using what systems. And about 66 different systems were represented in my survey. People mentioned using, and then total unique systems, 66 unique systems. Now, I want to just caveat this here saying this is not a figure showing popularity of systems. What it really does, it shows the breadth of the number of systems in use, but where you see more people mentioning the systems, it is more of a reflection of my networks. Like this survey went through these networks where, specifically through the networks of a lot of these tools, and therefore reached their users. So I just want to, caveat that, but it does, learning from this, we're like, wow, there's a lot of systems in use. And what are they used for? About 1/3 of them are education awareness, 1/4 for fire disaster and fire and disaster management, and 20% roughly the usage was for law enforcement, like enforcing land use policies. And I also want to capture how people are using this information. And this is where I borrowed I borrowed from the agile design or human-centered design on how to develop a tool for a specific user and a use case. And I kind of did the reverse, where I did a bunch of interviews with developers and users, and also through the survey, and went through all the information and tried to just piece out everything and went into these little succinct stories of, as this a role of who they want to do what action and why do they want to do it. And this was my way of trying to capture all the different ways who's using these systems, and how and why. An example of this is of this user story, and I have a bunch of these in my paper that I had published. So the WHO, Indigenous community member, monitors encroachment on their lands with a forest disturbance data and verifies alerts with photos or drone footage to provide evidence in a formal legal complaints submitted to authorities responsible for deterring these activities and uphold their land rights. So very long-winded sentence, but I was trying to capture the use of these systems, and that helps therefore inform or improve the design. And this is based on real examples. And also through this study, I was asking through the survey and interviews, what are the barriers to using this information? But I was also at the same time sourcing solutions. So this human-centered design, sourcing the solutions directly from the users, which is common, but the uniqueness here is that I wasn't just looking at one tool. So many, there had been several publications of specific tools where, they survey their users, and they say how they can be better, and they improve their tool. In this case, I was looking at all tools that anyone people were using, what are your issues, and what are your solutions? And I also broke it down by geography. I was trying to look at, I broke it down by roles and geographies and all these things, trying to figure out, are there commonalities between different types of people or different positions that the people are used, roles that they have, or where they are actually doing their work, and how does that affect it? So, in the most, especially in South America and Africa, that's a huge issue was just people not having the authority to act upon the information. So receiving information, but it's just not their job mandate. And often it's that the case that they just don't have the resources. It's like, great, I got your alert. I don't have staff. I don't have a truck. I don't have firefighting equipment. I can't do anything with it. Glad your satellites are monitoring and telling me there's a fire, but there's just no way to act upon it. So, so this is where I put together this table of, this is some examples of some of the barriers, and I really got some very creative examples of how people are using this information. And also some of their solutions to it. So some of the key takeaways from these studies was that the acronym, this is Conservation Early Warning Alert Systems I'm talking about. So I collected a lot of success stories of these systems and applications. That people are using a lot of systems. They're often using multiple systems at once, trying to compare confidence in the information, also not to rely on a single solution. And but at the same time, there's a lot of confusion about systems, the duplication of efforts, the filtering of information from different systems. And often I notice when talking to different users, they're using multiple systems and not realizing the data is all coming from the same source. It's all VIIRS fire data, but they don't think that. They think that no, that they have a different source, and so there was, because of how it's filtered and how it's disseminated from each system. And then the biggest thing is there are a lot of frustration from especially people, I'm talking to people in country who have their own systems. This is government agencies and NGOs where they develop their own solutions. And then they get frustrated because they have someone, coming funded by the World Bank or by another government coming down and saying, we built something for you, use it. And they're like, great, wish you talked to us. We already built something, would love to collaborate. But and there are just a lot of frustrations of seeing how much money somebody else got to build a solution that they're like, we wish we could have had that money to when we were building our solution. But a lot of frustration from especially in-country developers. And I mentioned earlier, there was issues of just the risk to surveillance technologies or just technology in general. And people had they had flagged concerns of privacy and the replacement of traditional knowledge with these systems, and again, frustration with external actors, and also just not dislike of, they don't want to be dependent on foreign systems because they have no control if those systems just up and poof and gone one day, and then they rely on something that just is out of their control if it stays in operation. So the overall takeaway from my dissertation work was, we need to fund the use of systems, not just building new systems and innovating, but beyond that, there's one more step. There's capacity building, but that's not even enough. You have to fund the resource, like the equipment needed to respond to this information, the continued capacity building to use it, the building capacity to continue to understand the updates. So it's just it's not a one-off and done. Capacity building should be the continuation throughout the whole life of this tool. And then we need more strategic investments to enable the actions. And then we have an opportunity now to shape new funding flows, especially in conservation. There's a huge influx from the private sector, massive, like the Bezos Earth Fund and all of that. And then really let's take advantage of that and see how we can shape how that funding is used to fund innovation. And it's not just building an innovative tool, it's how do we sustain these tools that exist that people rely on. And of course, there needs to be a lot more research to understand the risks of specific satellite-based monitoring and guidance for best practices. There is guidance now, indigenous data protocols, the CARE principles, but they need to be pushed out there and used more. And also new approaches to really to assess how are we when the information is being sent to someone, how they're using it, and where is that breakdown in information? Where is it happening along the decision-making chain? And then going beyond capacity building, co-designing solutions, and also action plans. So not just here's how to use the tool, but then what do you do with that information? And then in practice, that action plan to use that information successfully when there is a disaster or emergency. So thank you. I can't see the chat or anything, but I don't know. Tim, did you want to take questions now, or do you want to move to discussion?
Does anyone want to ask a question now? And there will be opportunities for discussion later as well.
Hi, Karen. This is Dave Jones. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Wildfire Cluster. I do have questions, but I'll ask you after this is done. This is really interesting research, and I'd like to see, or just hear about your input on a couple of things, particularly like the innovation that's brought to the table by the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research, and whether or not you researched those programs at all before finishing up your dissertation. Thanks.
Yeah, we can talk to you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did not research them, also because most of my work was international. And I believe that's US focused, but I'm not sure, but we can talk about that.
It is cool. Great. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm up next. So like the elephant in the room here is that in the next since the first of the year, we've had by far the largest wildfire catastrophe as far as property damage in US history in LA. And I was actually kind of concerned, and one, there were people who basically couldn't present because of this, but in addition, I thought that there's for the wildfire cluster, there's a need for us to actually engage with fire adaptation processes that are happening where people are actually like have been increasingly proactive in their engagement with fire. And so I wanted to share on this story that is from 2023, where there is an a data flow that has been developed by Rocky Mountain Research Station called PODS that has been very well aligned with beneficial fire strategy. And so what occurred in this event was it was one of the first times in which an incident management was able to be transitioned into resource objective fires in California at a very large scale. And so, there's this increasing use of this idea of strategic fire zones where we want to create opportunities for beneficial fire, but it is actually very hard to achieve with the social constraints that are on us. And so one of the components here is this wildfire paradox, which has been articulated by Dave Calkin and his co-authors about how the fires that we can eliminate are the fires that are burning in moderate conditions, and those are also the ones that are overall reduce our risk the most. And so can we build our data systems that allow us to plan our fire environment and proactively burn when it's safe and beneficial to do so. And there's this need for our data systems to provide better better decisions fundamentally. One of the linchpins of this is bringing along the communities at risk so that they see their shared risk, that there are circumstances in which using fire lowers community risks in ways that people can get behind. And the participatory mapping process is something that has really facilitated this at least in this instance, and this is a growing trend across the country. So I wanted to show this, just some videos of this event where, this looks a lot like a prescribed fire, but in fact, this is, late in an incident, in September of 2023, when there was basically a incident management team in Northwestern California was working in very high biomass, kind of dangerous forests. When the fire ignited, it was something that was actually like the focus of concern in the country at the time. And there was an early fall rain, and it facilitated the transition from this suppression view of the fire into the space where the management team felt comfortable pursuing these resource objectives. And so in this circumstance, these are relatively low fire line intensities, benign for the largely benign for the tree species. And this kind of operation is something that can overall lower a risk. And I included this this recon patrol just so that people could get a sense of the amount of resources that are being deployed in this kind of an event. This is okay, so what resulted from this fire, this is one of 6 fires that were in this lightning complex, but it's predominantly low to moderate burn severity, extremely effective in reducing fine fuels, and extremely effective in lowering long-term risk. Now, there were specific enabling conditions that facilitated this proactive use of fire, and the 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 data environment is only a component of this. Clearly there were factors, and most notably the participation of the tribal government and a network of community around them, including this very successful collaborative forest landscape restoration program, which is a long-term cooperative management agreement between multiple parties that have maintain they basically need trust. They know each other. They're negotiating disparate values on the landscape. Those things facilitated this this action. And the other thing is the weather data interpretation. The incident managers got a weather forecast where they felt like that the safest, the best management of ongoing risk was to essentially continue their burnout operations after the weather moderated significantly. And there could have been essentially a suppression effort. And the other thing, these kinds of events happen in an environment in which the national mobilization level is hugely important. And then finally, there was like regional support for this fire adaptation strategy that was built up through this process, which was one component of that was through this potential operational delineation process. And the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership, which this particular fire was in the center of, were early adopters in bringing this this view of the landscape, this potential operational delineation view forward. And over 6 months, there were 350 people who you know, worked on these maps and engaged in this discussion and articulated value systems about how we should be maintaining fires and how we should be engaging with these research sources. You know, this is an interesting example of one, this picture, because it's separating. To the right is a national park, to the left is an industrial timberlands. And there was, at the same time, the fire that I showed previously, there was a fire that was a lightning ignition that was basically held on this line. And identifying features where you can reliably stop fires of a certain scale is like the key to this strategy. Now, one of the things is that the you know, participatory mapping component of this is super important. You know, the pods process has an analytics process that Rocky Mountain Research Station, as part of the Forest Service, has really developed over a decade. It is a fairly simple data environment in some ways. I mean, it is very understandable to a lot of people, but it also is an analysis that fits in with the worldview of the incident management teams to a degree. It is not something that is alien to people who are using like things like that the Forest Service maintains, like IFTDIS, the interagency fire decision support tools. But this, you know, the component of people using paper maps and you know, discussing with their collaborators, their regional landscape collaborators, how their values are to be expressed on the landscape is something that is really key for building consensus for what can be very difficult decisions. Now, so the orange lines in this are basically those are the potential control lines that were identified in this pods process. And this is the burn for one of the 6 fires in this complex. But essentially, in that event, they were able to like create this structure that is building new containment opportunities for future fires. Key takeaways is pods is kind of I think it is taking a lot of the strategies that Karen's presentation had articulated. It's engaging a public or a community, or I'd say that the best pods processes are engaging a community that builds consensus around management strategies and is really distributing risk in the community in a way where the stewardship can co-occur with can travel with the management of the risk. You know, doing this engagement in the pre-fire planning stage is something that facilitates community buy-in for, you know, what can be difficult tasks. And the biggest issue from my perspective is we have lots of geospatial analysis that is done in like outside of a social context and outside of like a cultural context of decision making. And that's something that you know, it doesn't buy the incident teams a lot of credibility with the public that they're responsible to. That's fundamental. So this participatory mapping path is something that adds a tremendous amount of value and I think you know, this is not extremely high technology per se, but it is something that is as you know, there are important implications that tie in with this human-centered design approach. So that's all for that. And does anyone have any questions now?
Yeah,
Douglas.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in. I think this question probably both for you and Karen, because the plenary this morning or today earlier today was talking about co-production. I see there was some of the parallels, but both you and Karen were talking about potentially maybe moving towards the co-production mode when trying to developing those tools and programs that can be participatory, like mapping, and then to elevating the stakeholders who are going to be benefiting or contributing to the whole tool ecosystem. So, and do you see any of the things you see would be useful when moving forward when some of those developing either those goals and activities using those co-production like mode?
Yeah, and the primary regional funder who facilitated that potential operational delineations project explicitly uses that language in their vision, and it's a coalition of 7 county governments and 28 tribal governments that has a regional responsibility for fire planning in California, and they think about knowledge co-production like all the time in their kind of decision processes. And I think that there are within that area, there are actually very different communities of interest that have sway over different landscapes. And there's in that space, there has evolved kind of, I'm going to describe it as kind of respectful engagement between parties that can have, different opinions about natural resource outcomes. So I really was pleased to be following the presentation this morning because I thought it was very well aligned to this concept broadly.
I can also talk about co-production. It is definitely seen as, almost I mean, it's necessary if you actually want your tool to get used to actually know, work with the end user, and that has definitely been something that I feel has been practiced more in the last several years, and especially with the mandates and a lot of grants that you've seen over the last several years that actually you have to demonstrate a co-production or how the end user is going to help with contribute to the design and how you're going to work with them for capacity building and to use the tool. But I will say that, one thing that I haven't seen enough of yet is the reducing the risks of technology introduction. Especially, you have these really cool projects that are, get a lot of media attention because they're like, look we built a mobile app with an indigenous community and now they have mobile data connection and internet access. And how does that change their culture? Their culture is changing all the time. I'm not saying, indigenous culture is not static. We shouldn't think of it that way, but I think it's fair to really evaluate and discuss first the risks. We don't even do that enough with our own kids and family of talking through what are the risks of, we are talking about it more now, but what are the risks of the apps that we're downloading and where is our information going? We don't even do that ourselves. I do a very good job. And then, and so I think it's our responsibility to also make sure that we are addressing or at least try to identify all the potential risks when we are producing technologies. And then also having that discussion of data ownership, privacy, all of that. There needs to be more of that happening in this co-production. And that's one thing that I definitely was central to my research that I was writing about.
Karen, this is Dave. I was just wondering. Oh, sorry, Douglas. Saw you raised your hand. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna try to follow up if that's okay, because
Yeah.
one of the sad news that was happened during the LA fire this just last week was the collision of between a drone and with the firefighting planes that was in the area that basically took one really important asset out of the commission for a really long time. So I think just thinking about what Karen you're saying about the emerging technologies And so tools like that, and how can we best figuring out a way to managing the risk, right? Because that with all those technology becomes much more accessible to others, and how we think about in a way make it it's secure, right? Both opening up the opportunities, but also making it safe and don't um, jeopardizing other really important operations you have. And I think that's one of the reasons I've heard from some of the agencies, seeing some of the data directly with the live fire are not immediately shared because that can have some implications on how people react to those data, that impact on the firefighting activities on the front line as well. So any thoughts on managing the balance of that?
Something I consider similar is the extent that so watch duty as a product has been very influential, especially with the LA fires, but they've been growing in their impact, and that's like a phone app-based system that is built to do fire journalism and track instant response communications. And they spend a lot of time talking about the things that they kind of shield data, like in specifically about fatalities, injuries, um, but they've I think that they've struck a nerve as far as like producing value out of these somehow. I mean, I think they've really achieved something important.
Yeah, it seems to me that like the Watch Duty app and that group, I mean, they have a lot of people monitoring different channels and putting information in there. That people, it just shows people have a need for access to real-time information that's easy to consume, you know, and when it's easy to consume, then more and more people can use it for their situational awareness and decision making. And you know, I think, you know, Karen, one of the things that you found. And I'm curious too about the length of these, you know, grants, whether they're from NASA's Applied Sciences Division or any other organization, that they have as a metric, you know, that somebody you're working with will adopt the technology, you know, after maybe 2 or 3 years of evolving it. And then in the last year, you work with the, you know, the user, and you know the expectation that they're going to adopt it and use it operationally and start paying for it is a little bit far-fetched, I think. And particularly since there are so many tools out there that a lot of them require high-end GIS knowledge, you know, and things like that. So I'm just curious as to how maybe the wildfire cluster can make some recommendations to agencies who are going to put out calls for proposals for how important it is to continue to fund the engagement, the communication, the training, the use of it out, you know, in out years. That would be very valuable, I think.
Yes, and I definitely agree. As a person on the receiving end of, you know, the short funding cycle of like NASA grants, and doing one of those applications where you have to demonstrate the transition of the technology. This is where I don't know. This is where I was thinking of this solution of looking at the funding landscape and like, can we better shape this philanthropic landscape to better meet our needs? Because it doesn't have to be these short time, you know, tied to fiscal year type of things with government fiscal years. I mean, we all see that the grants are getting shorter and less money. And so that's where I think there's a lot of discussion on this, like how we could take this opportunity to say, this is part of the user co-design adoption is longer term funding not necessarily complete transfer of an entire technology, but those are the discussions we have to have. What can work, what will work. And I don't know, sorry, that was just kind of my initial
No, that's
thoughts.
good. I think there's really, the situation is the same in funding social science research. I mean, there's a lot of funding being put into how to address misinformation and disinformation, like the research about it, but there's no funding going into actually combating it. There are solutions out there on how to combat misinformation, but funders, foundations, others are saying, no, we want to research it more. How long are you going to research it? That's really a tough thing when you have solutions to address it. And it's the same thing with tools and technology. I mean, our example is GeoCollaborate, where we developed under the SBIR program, which takes output from any data source and puts it in a collaborative environment so you can present the data to everybody and they don't even have to touch the map. You can explain to them what that data means, how to use it, and then they can access it on a dashboard, and turn it on and off themselves. So it's taking those complex tools and making them easy to use, which is really going to get a high adoption rate. And that's why Watch Duty is so successful. It's on your phone and it alerts you when a new piece of information comes in. And if you're sitting there threatened by a wildfire, that's the most important sound you're going to listen for. There are tools out there, but just not everything is brought together in a cohesive form for the public to understand, much less non-technical decision makers who have to make $1 million decisions and they don't even know what a satellite image is.
Rama, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I was listening to Dave's comments here and wondering if, rather than the different programs in NASA, for example, have different roles. There are research and demonstration programs at different TRLs, technology readiness levels. And then, of course, there is the SBIR program, where you've got different phases of funding, the first phase being a low amount of money, and then increased amount of money later. And I was wondering, that would be the path that these real-time applications have to take.
Yeah, I think, Rama, the SBIR program is, can stretch over a decade. That's how long, ours has stretched over. But I think one challenging thing that agencies don't realize at all, and that is the value of the SBIR program. And when you get to either phase 2 or phase 3, agencies can work with you on a sole source basis with no further competition. So there's not a lot of time or effort spent on having agencies understand the value of phase 3. They just want to go on and roll over and fund another phase 1 and then take it to phase 2 and fund another phase 1 and take it to phase 2. But the phase 3 is really very valuable and shows that an agency has invested in the technology to develop it. So other agencies should take notice, and there's no real communication across the federal government as to what innovations have been developed and which ones have reached phase 3, which could be very, very valuable and save other agencies a lot of money for trying to invest and develop the same thing.
Dave,
So in terms of what this cluster can do, I suppose the comments that you have made here are probably useful to be passed on as a recommendation from the cluster, and cross communication between agencies and steady funding of a certain thing to bring it to fruition for application and so on. Those are probably useful comments to make.
Yeah, and Dave and Rama, given the time, I think we're about the time where we should get into the mirror board. I think that's a good topic on public-private and academic partnership on some of those innovation and taking into practice. there are a lot of the details need to be worked out. That I was just going to leave it there and then turn it back to 10 on the Miro board.
Yeah, thanks. That was where I was feeling as well. Okay, so I just put the link into the Miro board, and I kind of have an assignment for early assignment for folks. So Miro is like just as a brief introduction. So can everyone see my cursor? You can control
Yep,
you
we
can
can see
control
it.
these like sticky notes with your mouse, and you can place them wherever. And I've put I kind of would like to have a little assignment where I would love to have people, like basically everybody, think of a topic that they think that the wildfire cluster should be tracking over the next year or so, or and then
Yeah,
if you have any, go ahead.
it might be easier if you start sharing with the screen, and so people can see where you.
Oh, you know what? I thought I had started sharing. Okay, so sorry about that. I had, can you see me now? Can you see
Yeah.
the screen? Okay, so there's these two boxes. So I set up, this is a timeline where this is like the potentially our cluster meetings before the Seattle meeting. This is like impact versus effort matrix, which is interesting. But I think to start, it would be useful just to get people to add topics that we should be tracking collectively as the wildfire cluster. So if you think of something that is just like, we've had several suggestions within this conversation. I would love it if everybody put something in the, what should we be tracking as the wildfire cluster? And then if you have a resource that you'd like to share that's that will be useful for people, like for example, I've been looking at this Development Seed put out this spreadsheet of 50 tools that are basically live for the LA fires. And it is actually kind of exactly the I think it is a compliment to Karen's analysis of just the breadth of tools that we have available. So I'm going to add that to the resources page just for people to have access to. And does anyone have any questions about the use of Miro in general that I should clarify before we get going? Okay, so yeah, I would love to get topics we should track. And then there are also these voting so there's these dot voting. And so if there's something that you see some other thing that you want to basically advocate for, drop a dot on it. And then otherwise, I mean, I think we're now in this phase of the rest of this session is continuing the conversation and trying to envision what we want to become as a wildfire cluster. So open. Would anyone like to elevate an observation that they're seeing on the Miro board for discussion? I'm particularly the compounding hazards between wildfire and other hazards is something that has come up quite often in the cluster.
Yeah, we just got an NSF grant to work on some compounding hazard and its impact on the health. So we just started it, and that it's fire is one of the 6 we're looking at, including fire with heat and fires droughts and other aspects of it. And I think there's also the cascading part, which in California has been quite like frequently happen, is that fire happen and then can lead to the mudslides in the following season when the rain comes in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I was imagining, and this doesn't have to be today, but the potential that things that we should be tracking on this panel could be elevated to this impact effort matrix that's above it, which is, you know, like we're assessing the difficulty versus the value.
I'm curious how those assessment what's the type of assessment that we're looking at for those value of those tools? I guess you can do those more economic type of studies, but then there's a jointly funded program by NOAA and USGS on looking at assessing the value of Earth observations. I think it went to World Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS, or I forgot. No, WWF actually. So, World Wildlife Foundation, they have been looking at working with specific stakeholders to understand those data and observations to support different use cases, including conservation and other activities.
So one thing that's been on my mind is some of the other clusters have you know are doing things like you know, producing papers or maintaining small resources. And I'm curious if there's anything that people see as being a role that the wildfire cluster could fit into that they think would be you know, worth pursuing in the next 6 months or so.
I'm gonna ask Dave if he has any specific inputs there. I think just looking at the mural boards, I saw some of the new people just joined. I'm gonna put the mural board in the chat one more time. So Tracy and Chris, if you haven't had a chance, go into the mural boards. That is where people have been putting the input into on specific topics, what the cluster to track. And I'm just looking at all those like sticky notes in the mural boards. I think probably it can still fit into different stages of the wildfire life cycle. And if we really are looking for paper ideas that could be organize it around the life cycle or the stages of the wildfire disasters, and then identifying what has been happening in the tool and data landscape for those life cycles, and what the challenges we see for the integration of those into the real world application and integration with decision making related to those life cycles. I think that could be an interesting white paper from the cluster.
So Douglas, you're talking about having as a product from the wildfire cluster being a white paper. It's
Yeah.
yeah. No, I think that's a good idea, because then it establishes the wildfire cluster as a organization with kind of a common vision, but open to innovation and people's ideas. But it does, having an initial white paper for the cluster does kind of establish it as an entity.
I think it's going to be really important to have people from both the research side as well as the industry side who has been developing some innovative solutions, as well as agency representatives on that, and to cover diverse perspective, and also comes back to the topic. I think Dave, you and Rama brought up some of the the need for the public-private and academic partnership in this landscape.
One thing I've been wondering about is whether we should kind of be thinking about outreach to like Department of Interior and U.S. Forest Service entities, so that they kind of are aware of where we are, because it seems like there's stronger kind of engagement with other components within the federal government. I guess
Yeah.
USGS as well here.
Yeah, Tim, that's a good idea. I mean, we want to get more people aware, first of all, of ESIP, but also the wildfire cluster. And I think when people realize it's an interdisciplinary meeting of people, and you don't necessarily have to wear your hats, and talk officially about your own agency. ESIP is a great place to collaborate and share ideas. So marketing, getting information out to other agencies is always, a good thing, a tough thing. It's tough to say who's going to do it, who's going to put this out here and get it out. But I think ESIP, if we can develop a key marketing, well, maybe it's the white paper, that ESIP could help distribute it to. Put it in the newsletter, that comes out on Mondays, or in the, beginning of each week, highlighting it. The wildfire cluster, we also have our own channel on YouTube, sub-channel on YouTube. So putting together some innovative presentations that are timely and relevant could go on to the YouTube sub-channel, and that's easy to share around. I think also some people think that this is, and it's true. I mean, the wildfire, these disasters are growing by the second, it seems like, and we're getting more and more extreme events that are impacting us. And it's tough to get your arms around it when you see on the news thousands of people are homeless because of this. But if we can put our collective minds together and put together this white paper, it could be a way to pull folks together and in here saying, you know what, this is how I can make a difference. I'm glad you put this mirror together, Tim. It's not only a lot of fun, it's very cool.
Yeah, Miro was a remarkable tool when I first was exposed to it. It can be really pretty impressive. Uh, I was in a 40-hour design sprint with California Natural Resource Agency about 3 years ago. That was really remarkable. It can be fun. Well, and we have this page, evidently we have it for up to a year as in its current um, format. And we can kind of change it into doing all sorts of different things and just add components. And the other thing is that I don't remember how to do this, but you can take snapshots of sections and print them as PDFs. So if people are want to kind of pull material on their way out today, well, I'll try to figure out how to do that.
There has been three of us talking. Let's see if there's any others who want to share their thoughts on some of the topics on mirror boards or just general comments or feedback you may have.
Hello, this is Stephen Kleen, NASA at Goddard. And I think it is important, as has been mentioned, to work with the U.S. Forest Service and specific organizations that have done a lot of work on this and really see what their needs are and what their where we need to where we could help out. So I appreciated the presentation. That was great, very interesting.
Are you by chance, have you intersected with the tactical fire remote sensing community previously?
That, what is it, Hinckley had run up, organized. I have. I haven't been active one lately. But I think that that kind of people are who we should be engaging with and building off of what they've done and
Absolutely.
what their needs are.
One of the things that has occurred to me with thinking about Seattle is engaging with Forest Service Region 6 folks as potentially reach out to them now so that they could potentially, if it was appropriate for them to participate while we're in Seattle, because that would be a relevant user community. Okay, so I have the export I think figured out. It's people want to export. I'll just do a quick screen share for okay, so this button, you've got board and export, and you can save as image, PDFs, or template, or a spreadsheet. I'm curious about that. So yeah, anyways, people feel free to share this, and I think the broad appeal of continued participation in the wildfire cluster is, I think we're all interested in growing clusters activities. So uh, come back.
One of the things that we might want to do as well, Tim, is in the next wildfire cluster meeting, which is in February, that we, pick this up and we continue to build upon this, with those that are going to be joining us. And I put in the chat, I'm not sure if everybody was connected here, but the wildfire cluster meets every second Thursday of the month at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, where, we may talk about current wildfire situations. We can pick up on this and really determine a direction that the wildfire cluster wants to go. We've talked for a while about, trusted data and identifying trusted data, but we want to make sure we widen it out and see, just like what Tim put together on the Miro board, which is pretty awesome here. So hopefully everybody gets a chance to contribute and then join us back here in February. This might also be a good engagement interface here, Tim, if we were to share this Miro address out to all of ESIP and say, hey, the wildfire cluster is working on these things. Feel free to come in and put your stickers on here. Maybe you can make the white area a little larger or whatever, and you can see what, I don't know if you can highlight which ones were put in during this session. And then the new ones can be put in to the right of a certain line or something, just so we can see what kind of new ideas have come in. But inviting, all of ESIP, and that would say, hey, wildfire cluster's working on this kind of stuff. Are you guys interested and you want to contribute?
I think we can definitely kind of version control it, where we can kind of link all the stuff that was kind of contributed in a certain era, and then and we can also add new templates to this that have different structures. There's some really cool things inside of Miro.
Yeah, no, I really like it. This is very cool. I'm going to have to, Douglas, I'm going to have to drop off just a little bit early. I have another call at 3 that I have to be on Eastern time, but I'll stay on as long as I can here. Great job, Tim. This is awesome.
Well,
Thanks,
and
Tim.
actually, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, if you have anything else you want to add before we close.
So there is a space on the Kiko chat. Well, one, I want to thank Karen. She that was a fantastic paper from my perspective. I really appreciate her presentation. But also, if you want to put anything onto, take homes from on our Kiko chat, there's spaces for people to contribute there. Or, we could also just do I'll do a takeaways here. If you want to contribute here, something that you think is the most important thing, anything you think is important in this session, or with regards to the wildfire cluster, stash it here, and we'll add it to the reporting with ESIP. Sorry, I wasn't broadcasting. So I put a takeaways box to the right of the and down page.
Thanks, Dan. I think that would be our end of the session. So thanks for everyone for joining this session today. And like Dave mentioned, you can always reach out to the mailing list, and as well as joining our monthly calls and join the ESIP Slack workspace and the Wi-Fi channels as well. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for having me speak. I really enjoyed this meeting, and I look forward to continuing the collaboration.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks so much for your presentation, and Tim, for putting this session together. You guys rock.